Hello there, and welcome to Magic by Design. If you're new to the podcast, each and every week we watch and review a movie from the Disney Animated Feature Collection and break it down in order to discover the secrets behind the magic.
This time we're breaking down 8 films.
I'm Ken, and I'm joined by my co-host / brother Garrett. Gar, how are you?
8 films. 8 whole different short films to examine in depth to find the emotional depth and nuance and the animation style and the music. It's fascinating, Ken. The premise of our podcast is untouchable.
8 small films. It's like 8 mini episodes.
Yeah, this is basically, we should just label this episode 3 through 11. That's what 3 plus 8 is, isn't it?
Yes, well done.
Maths.
In case that hasn't tipped you off, this week we watched Disney's third animated feature film, Fantasia. But before we get down to talking about it, Gar, what are your thoughts on Fantasia? Your initial feelings? Had you seen it before?
No.
Me neither.
I know the Sorcerer's Apprentice sequence because it's like and I'm like, yep, I know that. It's Mickey and the Sorcerer's outfit. Very adorable. Yen Sid, which is Disney spelled backwards, who is a Kingdom Hearts character. And of course, my entry level knowledge to Fantasia, like all things, is Kingdom Hearts.
Garrett's weekly Kingdom Hearts plug.
Yes, the Chernobog, what's it called?
Chernobog,
yeah, he's a boss in Kingdom Hearts. There's a level based on a Dream Drop Distance, which I haven't actually played, so I'm not aware of those Kingdom Hearts references. But Yen Sid is a very prominent character in the Kingdom Hearts universe, and first debuts in the Sorcerer's Apprentice in Fantasia. So that's my relationship with Fantasia, and also the music.
That's it.
Yep.
Done. You just spoiled the whole podcast, Garrett, with your talking about Kingdom Hearts.
There you go. We'll be going through 8 different films. It's good fun. They are not 8 equal films, though. We'll get to that in great depth.
Not all films are made equal, even by Disney.
Yes.
I'm trying to remember. I don't think I've seen this before.
Mm-hmm.
And I really wanted to like it.
Yeah.
But, as you said, we'll get into this. It was somewhat diminishing returns. This was meant to be a much smaller film, turned into a bigger film. There was 8 sequences, and I admired the effort. I admired the artistry behind it.
I don't even admire the artistry behind them all. I think the artistry behind some of them was boring.
Wow.
Yeah, there you go.
Taking down poor dead people who can't defend themselves.
They can't, but they made these magical pieces of work. Like, people love Fantasia, don't they?
Yeah, it's one of those iconic classics. I think more so for the Mickey Mouse character than
for the good bits of Fantasia as opposed to the boring bits.
Yeah, the magical wizard Mickey is one of those things that you still see.
He's not a wizard, he's an apprentice to a sorcerer again. It's literally in the name.
Sorry, the Sorcerer's Apprentice Mickey is something that is beloved by many.
Yes. And, yeah, I don't know. I don't think this film works as a 2-hour experience.
Yeah, we should note it is 2 hours and 5 minutes long?
Give or take, yeah.
Yeah.
And there's no end credits, so that is literally start to finish 2 hours and 5 minutes long. I think this film is a collection of short films, and it feels like it. So, like, watching it, like, 8 in a row, back to 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 back, I think I got 8 in there, it drains on you, because, again, not all these are created equal. Some of them are actually quite boring. Some of them are very long, because as you'll get into the whole premise, the whole idea of this is they basically set animation to classical music. So that's the whole idea, to tell the story of the classical music in animation. That's the concept behind it. So they chose 8 classical pieces and created an animated accompaniment to them. And some of them are very long and quite boring, and some of them are actually quite interesting.
I feel like if this was a series, maybe I would look on parts of it more favourably.
And I'd skip the ones I don't like. Which is, I think, basically the dinosaur one. After like 3 minutes, I'd be like, all right, I got the gist. I'm moving on.
I think that I really wanted to like this, as like it does hold up, and it is like held up by fans and critics alike as a piece of art and an important piece of animation history. But as we said, it was kind of a mixed bag.
Yeah, there's some of these animated pieces are tremendous. Like, some of them are really, really good. But the problem is there's 8 of them, and I think a good half of them aren't really good, and half of them are actually pretty good to great. So there you go. If this was a collection of shorts, I'd be like, oh, well, there's good ones and bad ones. As a 2-hour experience, I think on the whole, it's more bad than good, but the good is good.
Should we get into it?
We should get into it.
Fantasia began life in 1936, Gar.
That's a long time ago. That was before Snow White came out.
Sure, yeah. It was about a year before Snow White came out. Walt Disney felt that Mickey Mouse needed a boost in popularity, having diminished in previous years.
It's funny, we think the idea of like re-releases and rebrands and corporate redesigns is like a relatively modern phenomenon. But like here in the 1930s, they're like, oh geez, Mickey Mouse isn't connecting with people like he used to. We have to do a big brand relaunch for Mickey Mouse, because that's what The Sorcerer's Apprentice was. It was like the reboot for Mickey Mouse, the kind of the redesign, the rebrand, the reboot to propel him back into the public consciousness. And it's fascinating, like again, it's like, oh, everything's a remake these days. It's like The Sorcerer's Apprentice is basically Mickey Mouse's first remake.
I think it's partially because he declined in popularity, but also Disney had spent many of those years focusing on releasing feature-length animation, so they didn't really do anything with Mickey Mouse, so he fell out of the public consciousness.
Because like the original premise of this, like The Sorcerer's Apprentice was just meant to be a standalone, whatchamacallit, symphony thingy.
Silly symphony.
Silly symphony, and they're like, this is becoming really expensive. So they turned it into a grand operatic experience that with a full orchestra accompaniment that had 7 other animations tucked in, and like it worked. So like all power to them. This is one of the more iconic versions of Mickey Mouse, as opposed like the 2 images that people probably have of Mickey Mouse are like the classic Mickey Mouse, you know, not classic as in like 1930s, but the, you know, red pants, yellow shoes, yes,
white gloves.
That image of Mickey Mouse is the one most people have, and the second one is probably Sorcerer's Apprentice Mickey Mouse, even probably ahead of like real retro Mickey Mouse.
I'm not sure how they envisioned The Sorcerer's Apprentice to go, because all in all it is an 8-minute sequence. So I think that would have been released with something else. But City Symphonies were always something that was before a major feature or something like that, or accompanying other films. So like it would have to have made an awful lot of money to make its money back. So they decided to expand it to a feature film. The concept of matching animation to classical music was used as early as 1928 in the aforementioned City Symphonies. But Walt wanted to get away from the usual slapstick and go somewhere that was more
artistically valid.
Yeah.
But in fairness, Sorcerer's Apprentice is only slapstick, so much for that.
He wanted to produce shorts where, quote, sheer fantasy unfolds, action controlled by a musical pattern has a great charm in the realm of unreality. They spoke a completely different language back then.
This was for children. Remember this. This, like, we're going to make this real good accompaniment to classical music and really express the music through the animation. It's like, this is for children. And they're like, we've got to teach them all. This is basically a 2-hour and 4-minute music lecture for kids.
Yeah.
Like expressly with like the actual lessons in there with who's the host guy?
Oh God, I specifically memorized his name because it's so weird. Deems Taylor,
indeed. Not Deans, which I thought at first. And I had to Google it. I was like, what kind of name is Deans? That's not his name. It's Deems with an M, W-M.
Well, his actual name is Joseph Deems Taylor, so I think it was just a stage name.
So he's Mr. Pretentious Music Man who has a dumb name.
Yeah.
Classic. But yeah, there's like the full music lectures in there in the middle. It's like, what you're going to watch today is an accompaniment of music. Some music tells the whole story. Some music only tells some of the story. Some music is vague and abstract, and thus the accompanying animation follows. And it's like, oh, I've just buckled myself in for a music lecture. I
thought that part really fell flat because the guy has a great knowledge of music and a great voice. He actually has a really great old-timey radio voice, but he really just stood there and just delivered a reel after reel of exposition about exactly what we were about to see, which kind of takes away the surprise of it, first of all, but also doesn't allow us to discover it or interpret it for ourselves.
Yeah, because before each of the shorts, he popped up with like an introduction to each short, and he'd be like, what you're about to see is the introduction to the planet Earth. Earth began as single-celled organisms, and I'm now going to tell you everything about single-celled organisms, dinosaurs, the extinction of dinosaurs, and then what happens next. And then you watch that and you're like, well, spoilies.
Gar discovered a fun fact about their theories on the extinction of dinosaurs back then.
I had no idea that the idea that dinosaurs were killed off by a meteor was relatively recent. I thought that was a thing we discovered in like the 1500s, you know, that like Galileo discovered this. Where it was like, no, the first time that theory was posited that an a meteor impact caused an ice age, caused tsunamis, was introduced in 1980. Until then, we thought the dinosaurs just died off due to a random drought. Like, that was the prevailing theory. We still don't, like, know 100%, but, like, the timing adds up because they found the crater in Mexico that they think is the meteor that killed the dinosaurs, and it lines up with 66 million years ago, which is the same time the dinosaurs went away. So, like, the timing works out. We still don't know, like, for 100%. But unless we invent time machines, we probably will never know 100%. But, yeah, we were like, a drought, maybe?
It's the exact opposite. It was like an ice age, wasn't it?
Yeah, it was the meteor caused significant global cooling, significant climate change, wiped out 75% of creatures on Earth, including most dinosaurs. Not all, because some of the birds we consider evolutionary partners of dinosaurs.
Great.
There you go. Jurassic Park. Well, I was fascinated. Like,
let me finish.
Sorry, this is the musical podcast where we accompany our Disney takes with the classical John Williams music. But like, yeah, the idea that that's a theory that's only 40 years old. I was like, what?
I thought we always knew that ever since day one.
Like, not day one, but like, you know, a couple hundred years. Not like relatively modern science. It's amazing. Blew my mind.
That theory is not much older than me.
Yeah.
I'm quite old these days.
You're ancient. You're like 70.
Anyway, getting back on track here, Gar. Upon receiving the rights to the music for The Sorcerer's Apprentice, which was by... I have it here.
I'll fill the time.
Paul Dukas.
There you go.
French composer. Inspired by the original poem, which was written by Johann Wolfgang von Goethe.
Of course.
Disney wanted to use a well-known composer to up the prestige of the short.
Well-known composer, of course. Yes.
So he used... Actually, he didn't have this person in mind. He just happened upon this famous composer in a Hollywood restaurant called Leopold... I practiced it so many times, Ken.
Ken saying famous Russian composers is great. This is Tchaikovsky?
Leopold Tchaikovsky. Nailed it.
Tchaikovsky, there
Actually,
we go.
he was English of Polish extraction.
Oh, Polish, there we go.
He met him in a restaurant anyway, and he discussed the short with him, and Leopold said he liked the music, and he had some interesting ideas about the colour of music and matching it with the medium.
You know, when I was watching this for the longest time, I thought the narrator and the composer were the same or conductor were the same person, and they're not.
Nope.
It was like, only like on the third time when they cut away the conductor, it's like, wait a minute, that's a different person. There we
well
go.
done, Gar.
That shows how much I pay attention to things. That shows how much I take things in.
Disney allowed Tchaikovsky to employ an entire symphony for the recording. So Disney hired a stage at Culver City Studios in California for the session. It began at midnight on January 9th, 1938.
Why did it begin at midnight?
So they wouldn't be disturbed, I guess.
Well, someone wouldn't walk in? That seems like poor labour practices back there in the 1940s, 30s.
It lasted for 3 hours, so well into the morning.
Midnight till 3 a.m. They were like, they're the real brooms carrying the water here, aren't they? That's a metaphor.
Yeah. So for the original short, they used 85 Hollywood musicians. But as you said, Gar, you buried the lead there. The production costs spiraled, and it was too expensive to release and turn a profit, so they expanded it into a feature. Mm-hmm. The original name for Fantasia was The Concert Feature.
That's a boring ass name. I can see why they changed it. Oh, you know, that people will go see the concert feature because they have to go through, they jump through all kind of hoops to actually release this damn film, didn't they?
Tchaikovsky was invited back to choose new pieces to expand the film to a feature length.
There you go. Big fan of Bach and other such people.
He really went for it because
Tchaikovsky.
As we know, the longest Disney movie to date would have been about 80 minutes and this overshoots it by quite a while.
Stravinsky. Trying to think of composers.
Beethoven.
Was Beethoven in there? Oh, Beethoven was in there.
Sure,
yes.
Again, Gar, you're getting way ahead of yourself. We're still setting the scene. We're trying to get people's minds back to the late 30s.
Yeah, because they all lived there, sure.
I mean, like, I'm trying to create a prestige podcast, kind of like, you know, This American Life.
Is NPR. Back in the 1930s, they picked Tchaikovsky music because they thought it would resonate with the audience at the time. Children were not aware of Tchaikovsky, except at learning them in their piano
You're just
classes.
saying, first of all, you mixed up Tchaikovsky and Stravinsky, and now you're saying Tchaikovsky, who wasn't even in the film.
Yes, he was.
No, he wasn't. Was he?
Nutcracker.
Is it?
That was Tchaikovsky.
Was it?
Aha!
Okay.
Don't you question me.
I'm going to hold my hands up here. I'm not an expert on
classical
music by any means.
I do wonder, like, the degree to which classical music permeated the culture back then a lot more than it probably did now. Like most of these songs I've heard of, except the ones in the Greek one, no idea. And What was the other one that I didn't know? What were there was the Dance of the Hours. Great piece of music. Or is it? Yeah, sometimes. I don't know. Some of the music in this film is bad. That's what I'm getting at, Ken.
It may jog your memory when we go through it in a minute.
There's so many of them. There's 8 of them.
So Tchaikovsky, at this point, brought in his own orchestra because he was the head of the Philadelphia Orchestra at the time. And at that point, they made efforts to increase the sound quality because at that time in theatres it was very primitive.
Just watch Snow White and listen to it and then think about, what if that was played over bad speakers? It's like, oh, it's unlistenable.
In most movie theatres there'd just be one speaker behind the screen, which creates a very tinny, hollow sound.
So they were trying to invent surround sound is what you're getting at.
Yeah, so they wanted...
And surround sound isn't even like that. Unless like, let's put speakers behind them as well. So it's not like some magical invention. It's just more speakers.
Yeah, but there's layering of sound and there's multi-track and
there is like the audio is designed to feed into certain speakers and others depending on the scenarios, but it's still just more speakers.
It's very complicated, but Fantasia is the first film that was released with the first commercial film released with stereophonic sound.
There you go. Not just mono, but stereo.
Nicole gets into it later. Nicole, if you haven't listened before, is our musical correspondent. She sings a song every week that finishes the podcast. She has a music degree and she explains it much better than we could. So let's just move on.
Explain the difference between mono and stereo for me, Ken.
Well, actually, I can do that. I have some media studies there. Mono is 1 track, stereo is 2.
There you go.
Nailed it. Ben Sharpstein, a production supervisor on Fantasia, noted that its budget was 3 to 4 times greater than any city symphony, but Disney saw this trouble as an opportunity. He saw it as giving birth to a new concept, a group of separate numbers, regardless of their running time, very much regardless of their running time, put together in a single presentation.
He was wrong!
It turned out to be a concert, something of high quality and novel appeal.
Novel appeal. No one else did it again. It didn't become a brand of film. It didn't become a brand of animation. We don't get collections of shorts released theatrically. Get out of here, Disney. Fantasia crawled its way to a success out of like 17 different re-releases, being recut like 700 times. So, yeah, Disney, you were wrong.
Yeah, it's a good point, Gar. It was released in November 1940 as more of a roadshow type thing, so they wanted it to be kind of like an event that you'd go to. In fact, the original release of the film had an intermission. It's actually still in the piece today if you watch it on Disney+. So people, after the first hour, could stretch their legs and come back in and watch the second half, much like a real concert. But it struggled to make money, first of all, because it was released in the midst of the Second World War.
Well, the US weren't involved in the World War at that stage. They weren't involved in the World War till 1941. It struggled in Europe because it could not be released in Europe due to World War II.
Yes, much like Pinocchio, it just cut off some major markets, including Asia as well. But the expense of producing the new sound, which Nicole will explain in much better detail later, and the expense of installing it in the theatres where they went. On
2 speakers instead of 1.
Multiple speakers, and some of them had to be operated individually, so they had like 6 or 7 ones that were just operated manually by people to highlight and low light different parts of the film.
There you go. That seems unnecessarily elaborate, and in typical Disney fashion, there is no compromise.
No, I think as we talk about trying to find the secrets behind the magic, one of the things that we've learned is they'll do whatever it takes to make it right or make it special.
No matter how much it costs, and no matter whether or not they'll... It's actually interesting that's the spirit of original Disney, and it's kind of so far away from the spirit of current Disney, which is like, we make films by committee, we make films designed not to make people angry, we make films that are like, these are focus group to death to be as mainstream appeal as possible. And Fantasia's like, we're going to throw together a bunch of animated films set to music, but we can't do it in regular theaters, so we're going to invent our own way of doing it, and we're taking it on a road show, and will it be financially viable? Who cares? We'll work it out in the end. Because like, people went to see it. It's just, it cost so much money to make that it would not make the money back.
And it had to be re-released multiple times, as you said, to make the money.
This film was released like 15 times. If you go to the Wikipedia history of the number of times this film was released, it's like, it was released in 1940, 1940. It was released after the war. It was recut into a more theatrical friendly version that was like an hour 45. Then recut into another more theatrically friendly version, which was I think about an hour 20. And at that stage, they probably made the film better because it's less long. But realistically, they should have recut it into an 8-minute film with just the Sorcerer's Apprentice and begged people to pay for it.
I would push back slightly on your notion that Disney has lost that spirit of experimentation.
They definitely have, though. Everything they make it's not meant to challenge. It's not meant to push you. It's meant to be. And I don't mean this in the sense that the things they make are bad. It's just the things they make kind of aren't interesting.
I would say you're correct in the live action realm, as in people have been fired as head of the studio if they had a flop. They don't accept failure in that regard, and they do have a very specific way of doing things. But if you look at the animation side, they do develop animators and they do allow them space and creativity and resources to make shorts and develop themselves and experiment. So, and the Imagineering core at Disney is still very much alive. So
you're spouting your Disney brand corporate words like Imagineering. You're unbeknownst to me, this is actually a paid podcast, except only one of us is getting paid.
What I will concede, and I will say is the difference now, is it's all done for profit and none of it is entertained if it doesn't make money in the long run.
Yeah.
But back then there was a spirit of experimentation, which is very much alive in this film, which is one piece you could admire about it.
I don't even think it's like a spirit of experimentation. I think it's just like the whims of Walt Disney. It's like, if he got a thing in his head and he wanted to do it, he'd just do it. Like, regardless of whether Fantasia, as we said, would make money. It's like, it made no sense to blow up. It's like, all right, the Sorcerer's Apprentice costs are spiraling out of control. So instead of like controlling costs and trying to release it, it's like, let's make another 7 animated shorts and release it as 1. It's like, that's the step beyond, because Walt Disney is a crazy person. I think we're missing crazy people in the world these days, Ken.
That's one thing I admire, and Disney, regardless of what people say about him being possibly racist and a Nazi, the thing I admire about him was that he had a vision and he stuck to it no matter what. You know, in the face of ruin, he went with it for it, and like his instincts were nearly always correct. Now, he wasn't always right, and he had some failures.
Like Fantasia.
Yeah, Fantasia would have been...
It made money in the end.
But, like, we'll talk about it later. It's come to be more appreciated in later years, but at the time, it would have been considered a flop.
That was critically well received at the time, though. People thought it was enjoyable.
Yeah, in terms of...
They were wrong, too.
Those box office receipts. It wasn't so great.
Well, no, I think it did very well. It had long runs in theaters. It's just, it cost so much money. So, like, it took them so long to make the money back.
I think the overall budget was around 2 million and it ended up making around 90 in the end.
In the end. It's like the 24th highest grossing film of all time, adjusted for inflation, so.
But it is one of those special event films that you do see released on occasion, just in theaters, just to have a run. You know, that happens a lot more these days as well. You know, films will come back more than they used to.
They should totally do this as a live concert experience. I'm sure they have at some stage.
They probably have. I can't imagine they haven't.
Because, like, we went to see Jurassic Park accompanied by an orchestra. They played the score while the film played on the screen. And, like, this film is literally that. Like, that's the concept of this film. You watch it, an animated accompaniment with an orchestra. Why not do that live? You could do that live. You could take that on the road. Fantasia on the road. Fantasia 2000 on the road.
I think that would be really enjoyable. I'd go see that. Maybe not the first one.
I'd just pop in and out, and it's the ones I like. Do the ones I like.
It's like at a concert, or when someone's doing karaoke, you're like, do Wonderwall.
Yeah, do Wonderwall.
It's like, do the Sorcerer's Apprentice.
do.
A bit about the animation, Gar. There, you know, we talked about a lot of the innovations that they were making at that time in the previous week's podcast, but over 1,000 artists and technicians were used in the making of Fantasia, which features more than 500 distinct characters.
Does it?
Yep, apparently so. I didn't see that, but that's the statistic I have here.
I guess, like, yeah, there's tons of dinosaurs, there's tons of hippos, there's tons of elephants, there's the giant devil things and the giant angel things and Mickey Mouse and Tinkerbell. So yeah, I wouldn't, if 500 seems high, but there's a lot.
One of the things I appreciate about the film was that segments were color keyed so that each scene fed into the next and each sequence fed into the next. So even the colors with the live pieces with the orchestra were all carefully chosen just so it flowed nicely.
And each sequence is wildly different. Like, it's not like they're like, we have one animation style that we consistently did. It's like the dinosaur sequence and the Greek flying horses sequence, Pegasus, sequences look dramatically different to each other. And like, in terms of like both style and colors and like just the different style of animation. One looks more realistic, one more looks more fanciful. So it's like, they went all in on the animation. But you pointed out to me, you said at one stage at the start of this film, it's like, that could be a Windows screensaver. And like, a lot of the early sequences in this film are like watching Windows screensavers. Very elaborately well designed, but it's just like sparks of color and fireworks. And they go through that loop for like 2 minutes.
I think that's possibly why it didn't resonate with us, because now that
I preferred those sequences to the freaking hippos and horses.
They were abstract and they were
abstract and they were weird, and like it was experimenting with animation clearly, and it was like people thought at the time it was like super psychedelic. It's like, what drugs were you on, Disney people, when you were making these weird images of things and colors and lights and reflections of music? And like that stuff was more interesting than the freaking back half of the film with the horses and the hippos. I'm really on the hippos. The hippo elephant sequence, I'm just like, ugh.
Kara, normally we kind of break down the story and the themes and the music, but this film is kind of all those things rolled into one.
Yes.
Like, the stories and the music of this film are inextricably linked, so I thought we'd kind of go through them one by one and just talk about them together, because they are one and the same in this film. So starting off, Gar, we get Toccata and Fuga, probably not the right way to pronounce that.
In D minor.
In D minor by Johann Sebastian Bach. So this one depicts, as you said, it's live action shots of the orchestra in kind of profile, and then it kind of goes into this trippy stuff. Basically, it's kind of like soundscapes.
Yeah. So it's basically, if you've ever played something on Windows Media Player and you've seen the animations, it's that, except not computer animated.
I think that's why it was less interesting to us, as I was trying to say earlier.
I like this one because, like, the idea of this one, this was most directly like the animated version of an orchestra. That's the idea of this one. That like this is what an orchestra looks like in like animated form. I thought that was a cool idea, especially in 1940.
And I think it set the premise of the film as well, that a lot of the sequences that would follow are set to the music, so the rhythm of the pieces matches the rhythm of the music. That was the idea. So I think that's a good way to upfront
introduce the concept. Exactly. Because as Mr. Deems said at the start of the film, like, some of these are full stories start to finish, and some are more abstract, unfinished stories that you can interpret in your own way.
Now let me break it down minute by minute before you watch it.
Yes. Do you notice I slip into a mild Deems impression every time I do that? And my old-timey radio voice.
Old-timey radio voice.
I'm speaking in a very deliberate fashion.
Do I talk like this in real life? Who knows? I haven't heard my real voice in years.
He does have a great voice.
It's fantastic. In fairness, we're ragging on him, but it was quite a nice, pleasant voice to listen to on the ear. Interesting fact about this car, Disney originally anticipated making this in 3D, this sequence.
Oh, that would have been a lot of effort.
So people would get a souvenir program with the glasses and they'd watch that bit in 3D.
Ugh.
That was scrapped though, because the cost of the movie was spiraling out of control, and Roy Disney, his brother, was like, nope.
And also, 3D sucks.
It sucks now, let alone then.
Yeah, there's never been good use of 3D. It's one of those things that we were like 10 years ago, because of Avatar. We were all like, 3D TVs, everything will be in 3D. And now it's completely gone away. I think none of our local theatres do 3D anymore, do they?
It was a gimmick for a while, like back a few years ago, and I saw quite a few movies in 3D against my will, because I think it is a gimmick that's not worth it.
Yeah, and at the time you're like, well, this is the new thing. And like, there's like IMAX, which is like objectively a better experience, like bigger screens, better sound. And then there is 3D, which is objectively a worse experience because you look everything through a weird color palette, and then the 3D isn't even very good. And then you get a 3D TV, because that was apparently going to be the thing, and they completely went away because nobody wants 3D. The only good 3D device in the history of 3D was the Nintendo 3DS.
Are you finished?
No, I'm not done, because because no glasses, and also eventually that became tiresome. And even Nintendo stopped making 3DS games that had 3D in them.
I had a 3DS and it made me throw up when I put on the 3D mode.
You should have gotten the new Nintendo 3DS with super stable 3D.
Yeah, it was just really trippy for me, and my eyes were like, ooh.
3D was a very 2010, 2011 phenomenon.
Next up, we have the Nutcracker Suite by Tchaikovsky, who I thought wasn't in this film. Tchaikovsky? God.
Oh, Tchaikovsky.
Tchaikovsky.
Hey,
Tchaikovsky.
Mike Tchaikovsky. Stuck in Monsters, Inc. land. I know it's Tchaikovsky, but I've adapted for the sake of the gag.
So, The theme of this was to take us through the seasons, and then we had animals and embodied characters, so like Tinkerbell, like fairies, but we also had
It was totally Tinkerbell. It was just Tinkerbell.
We had plants that came to life in different things. It was...
The animation here was super artful. I thought, like, again, these first two were like the interesting versions of what they were going for. It was more abstract, it was more like unique animation. It was really artful. That's the idea.
Yeah, exactly. It was timed really well with the music. The music, and like there was times when I was like, I'm watching the visuals and I'm hearing the music, but I'm not seeing them knit together. Like this one really, it felt like they were in symphony, for want of a better term.
Yeah, this is like the proof of concept of what they were actually trying to do. And the more they tried to inject kind of further narratives into these, I think the less interesting they actually became.
And I really liked the motif of bringing inanimate objects like plants and other things to life and giving them a character. I think that's...
You love dancing mushrooms, is what you're saying.
I love dancing mushrooms, dancing... I think it was a thistle?
Horny fish.
Horny fish. What... Like, this is a theme throughout this movie.
Ken was attracted to everything in this film.
There's so many sexy animals. Like, there's a sexy goldfish that does an Arabian dance with their, like, tail that's made to look like a... what's that thing that they... What's... the word is escaping me.
Tassel?
No, like what's like a veil? Yes,
there
a veil. Nailed it. Got it. And yeah, I don't know how to.
Ken was attracted to everything. Ken is blushing. He's furiously off right now to the animals in this film.
Okay, I will remind you once again that this is a PG podcast.
Sorry, you're the one that's attracted to the fish, not me. I'm not kink shaming. To each their own.
So to your point, Garrett, the magical mushrooms were designed by Art Babbitt, who used the Three Stooges as reference.
So the mushroom was a stooge.
The name of that dance is called the Chinese dance routine.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously mushrooms are...
Chinese.
Very famously Chinese.
Of course. That adds up. That's the way the world works.
Interestingly as well, Babbitt also kept the musical score on his desk as he animated because he wanted to time his movements with the music.
So basically he did a much better job of what they were going for than the other people in this film did.
Yeah, and you distinctly see that, as we said, it does work much better than other sequences in the film.
This is good. The entire podcast is just me doing the song from The Sorcerer's Apprentice.
The sequences, though, I thought the dance sequences with the flowers were very interesting as well because they were very well timed and very rhythmic.
Yeah. As I said, I thought this one was like, in terms of the theory of what Fantasia was meant to be, I think this was the best executed.
They brought in dancers to use as reference footage as well, and you can really see that they studied the movements very well. Next, we come to The Sorcerer's Apprentice.
Probably
the most famous sequence in the film, and the film... Well, this is the film, basically. The rest of it's just filler.
Basically, yeah, all of this is a vehicle for The Sorcerer's Apprentice at the end of the day.
Mickey Mouse was redesigned by animator Fred Moore for this, so this is the first appearance of Mickey Mouse as we know him today.
The modern Mickey Mouse first appeared here as a sorcerer, the apprentice.
Good one. The reason for this is because they wanted to give him a better range of expression.
Which they do.
I can't imagine classic Mickey in this, actually. It wouldn't work.
He'd be whistling with his steam willy hat.
The entire segment was also shot in live action to give...
With brooms?
With athletes from UCLA, apparently.
That's not brooms.
Which is an American university.
In Los Angeles.
Sure is. No, I think this felt like the most self-contained and...
It's an actual animated short. Like, the rest of these are weird, obscure things, or weird things that don't really have an actual narrative arc, or stuff that just happens. Whereas this is like Mickey Mouse steals the hat, Mickey Mouse tries to get the broom to do work for him. Mickey Mouse accidentally brings multiple brooms to life and then nearly drowns. Mickey Mouse learns his lesson. Yen said is mad. That's, there's a nice little narrative arc. It's a nice little short.
Yeah,
I would be like, this is the most revolutionary thing Disney has ever made. But it's just an enjoyable 8-minute short. If this played before, what was the last Disney? Frozen 2. If they played this before Frozen 2, I'd be like, that was a good one.
I enjoyed that as an extra bonus, but nothing to hang an entire film on.
As opposed to Maggie's Day Out, which was the actual short played before Frozen 2, which was not. Actually, no, that was Onward, wasn't it?
Onward, yeah.
Yeah, that was bad. Was there a short before Frozen 2? I don't think there was.
No, there wasn't.
That's upsetting.
I always like to see shorts before my films.
Unless they're bad Simpsons ones.
But I think the premise was very well executed here.
Yeah. And the music is good. The music is great. This is one of the few, well, not one of the few, but whether or not I can hum the songs from this is basically the litmus test of whether or not it's any good. And based on the fact that you've listened to this podcast where I've like 15 times, I'm into it.
It's tucked in there. It's great music. Mickey Mouse is given a role that we've never really seen him in before.
You're a wizard, Mickey. Do 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 do.
A lot more action that we're used to from Mickey in previous shorts have been quite limited.
You know, in the year like 2050, when Disney inevitably own Harry Potter, they're going to remake Harry Potter, except as a Sorcerer's Apprentice crossover, where Mickey Mouse is Harry, and I'd actually be into it.
I'd watch that.
Yes.
I'd totally watch that. Moving on now, Gar, to The Rites of Spring, your favourite portion of the movie.
It's so long. It's just so long. Like, I like the idea of it. We're going to like go through the history of man with musical accompaniment from Stravinsky, and it's going to be great fun. Except it's just endlessly long. The most interesting point is when the dinosaurs melt. But other than that, they're walking across like a field of quicksand, I guess, and they just start melting into the floor, and it's like, oh no, the dinosaurs are melting. Then they turn into bones.
I think that was meant to show how they turned into fossils.
Yes, they melted from the drought.
I got a very distinct feel of the Land Before Time from this movie.
Yes, all 14 of them. Is that what we worked out yesterday? When we went through every title of The Land Before Time. I loved The Land Before Time as a kid. I can't remember a thing about them.
The guy who created Land Before Time actually worked as an animator at Disney, so possibly this was an influence for him.
Or maybe they stole his ideas and made Fantasia.
It was very long. I think they tried to mimic what they thought was the movement of dinosaurs. It
was gruesome. That was the best bit, when they were like, dinosaurs are chomping at each other's heads.
But no blood.
No blood.
Enough.
Well, you get boobs in this film, but you can't get blood.
Garrett, we're skipping ahead. But they studied the movement of alligators and iguanas to try and mimic the movement of dinosaurs, but
yeah, the weird snake dinosaurs that were meant to be Stegosauruses.
Stegosaurus is like, basically, I know how to do a snake, so I'm just going to put it on top of a dinosaur body.
Yes, it was like.
Also, the Triceratops was moving way too fast for its size.
How do you know?
Because it's supposed to be elephant-like, in my view.
In your view, as a paleontologist, yeah?
You don't know me. Actually, yeah, you do very well. But I think, once we got to the dinosaur bit, it was kind of interesting, but it lasted around. It felt like 15 minutes. I'm not really sure.
It felt like 45 minutes, if I'm honest. It just kept going. Yes, because this is a 2-hour film with 8-minute sequences, which would suggest on average they should be 15 minutes long. And some of them were longer than others when you consider Sorcerer's Apprentice was only 8. So some of these were longer than 15 minutes. And it sure felt like it.
I just don't understand how you make a film to accompany the Sorcerer's Apprentice and then it end up being longer than the actual main piece itself.
Because you got to fill the time, Ken. And like we discussed this, but basically they are somewhat restricted by the pieces of music they choose, which are a certain length. But just rearrange the pieces of music, for the love of God.
If you're hiring a famous composer, surely he could reimagine it or shorten it down.
Yes. We've been remixing these pieces of music for decades. You could do it for frickin' Fantasia.
Up next, Gar, we had the Pastoral Symphony, which was...
Centaurettes! That's my big takeaway from this. Centaurettes!
Because centaurs doesn't cover it.
It's a typically masculine word. Only the men are covered under centaurs. Are there unicornettes and pegasusettes?
I think this is just symptomatic of the time where anything female had to be cute.
And add et at the end. It's stupid. Because obviously it's based on like Greek mythology. So like a lot of gods and throwing thunder from the skies and Pegasuses.
Yeah, in fact, the depiction of Zeus in this looks almost exactly like the depiction in a 1997 film.
Which I wonder, is that based on drawings that already existed of Zeus? So is there like a pre-existing... Or is this where we got the image of Zeus? I don't know. Knowing you and your relentless giving credit to Disney, it's like they invented the image of Zeus. I don't know where the image of Zeus was originally invented. So are they all playing off the same source material? I assume there's like drawings.
It feels very specific, so I don't know if they'd have come up with that by themselves. The music here was by... Why can't I find this?
It's our pal Beethoven.
It's our pal Beethoven. I was struggling to find him in my notes there. Again, this felt very long.
Yes. These three, the dinosaur one, the Greek one, and the friggin' hippo one, are the three that I'm like, if you took this out of this film, you would make the film a good, 45 minutes shorter probably, and much better.
Yeah, because like they made movies that were less than an hour and a half up until this. And if you took those out, it would have been around that mark, and I think it would have been a lot better for it. I don't think it would have flowed any differently, and maybe you had to rearrange some of the pieces, but...
And like the music wasn't as good. I didn't like these Beethoven or Stravinsky tracks. They're not particularly memorable. The way they matched it to the animation wasn't particularly good. The narrative of the animation itself wasn't particularly interesting.
I found them both very confusing.
Yeah, there's just stuff happens and it's like, oh, gods are here and now the god has gone to sleep and he's tucked himself in a cloud.
Lots of sexy animals.
Yes, Ken was, his horniness overwhelmed his brain.
Apparently the motion picture board who not censored films, but when films were being made, they would give guidelines on how they should be made, and standards and practices forbade them from having the female centaurettes, quote, nude.
But they did have them nude. There was exposed centaur breasts.
With no nipples for some reason.
Yes, but the men didn't have nipples too, so maybe the centaurs don't have nipples.
Apparently they redesigned them as well because they were very intimidating in the beginning, so they wanted to make them more appealing to a mass audience.
So there's boobies in this Disney film.
There is boobies, maybe 30 seconds.
Yeah.
And then they're wearing wreaths and
they
garlands.
They make themselves decent. Disney boobies.
The governing body stipulated that they had to put those garlands in there going forward. So they allowed a little bit of boob, but not too much boob.
Boobies in a Disney film. How did that happen?
Gar, the boobies come in at the start, and Gar just checked out for the rest of it, and he's just saying to himself, "Boobies, but boobies,
Disney, boobs, Disney boobs."
I think this was meant to depict Bacchus, the Greek god of wine and food.
Sure, there was a bunch of all the gods popped up with in their different roles. It was boring. It was boring.
I liked the depiction of the gods. I thought they were interesting, and you saw something similar again in Hercules, probably 40 years later. But no, it just didn't do it for me. And moving into the Dance of the Hours by Ponchielli, I should say. Mm-hmm. It's described as a comic ballet in 4 sections, morning, afternoon, evening, and night, danced by different animals. So the first one is ostriches, the second one is hippos, the third one is elephants, and the fourth one is
gators.
Gators.
The hippo runs through multiple of them because they dance around the hippo, and then the gators are horny for the hippo, and I think there's some things going on with those gators and that hippo, but then the gator falls in love with the hippo and then crushes the gator, and then that's the story.
I think so.
Also, I was confused that this whole thing is basically set in a Greek pantheon, and we just had the freaking Greco-Roman gods thing. Why wasn't that one set in a pantheon? That was literally set on Mount Olympus. Yeah.
For me, I was like, yeah, why is this? Maybe they just had that setting for the previous one and you just want to save money.
Yeah, it's just push that over to the 7th one. We'll use nature for Mount Olympus.
Surely it should have been on a stage or something like that if it's going to be a ballet. Or even...
Maybe it was meant to be a theatre. Even, again, very long, very boring. These 3 is where the film really lost me. This is the stretch where the film is just what are you doing to the hippo? Leave the hippo alone. Get to the point. End the film.
Yeah, it's I found during these 3 parts, I was really watching my watch a lot, looking at the clock, saying, God, how much longer is left in this? Where the first hour felt quite bouncy and it went quite quickly, and then the second hour, it's kind of like a curve. It just really went downhill.
Ooh, dinosaurs and hippos.
Too many sexy animals, Gar.
Too many
confusing
feelings.
Disney loves, if you look back to Pinocchio, he has a really sexy fish, and there's sexy goldfish in this film as well. So they really like getting the mileage out of the sexy goldfish.
Yeah. It ended on a high, though.
Do you want to take us into that one, Gar?
Night on Bald Mountain by Mussorgsky. There we go. Plus Ave Maria by Franz Schubert, which was, I thought, one of the better ones. I think it might have been my favorite if I had to rate it. I think I'd give it a 9. And I was like, where do I remember Night on the Bald Mountain from? It's like, what? Where is that in my brain from? First level of Earthworm Jim. There you go.
I think I remembered it from something else as well, but it still hasn't come to me.
Yeah, I was like, I know that from somewhere. Obviously, it's a classical piece of music. It wasn't invented for Fantasia. I was like, where do I know it from? And yeah, Earthworm Jim is where because Earthworm Jim was all set to classical music as well for reasons passing comprehension.
So this one depicts the devil Chernabog, and he raises spirits from the dead and calls them to cause havoc.
Fight the angels and stuff, yeah.
And they're fighting the angels, and then they're almost about to win when they're driven back by the sound of the Angelus.
Bong! It's not the Angelus. It's currently 5:27, Ken. The Angelus isn't for another 33 minutes while we record this.
Thanks, Gary.
We should have timed that. We should have recorded this 33 minutes later, open the window, because there's a church that you can actually hear the bells from within our distance, and we should have listened to the Angelus live.
I think for me, if you're going to set aside The Sorcerer's Apprentice, which, we could agree it was the original film, so...
It's the centerpiece.
It's the centerpiece, so it was the most fully realised. I think this is my favourite sequence, because... Yeah. It was the most striking in terms of the visuals. It had a very specific Gothic style and it didn't tell a very layered or nuanced story, but it was
just a coherent one. That's the problem. The dinosaur one was coherent as well. It was just way too long. Like if they did the history of the dinosaurs in like 5 minutes, I'd be like, yeah, that's pretty cool.
This was a simple good versus evil, heaven versus hell story.
Two
good
really
music.
Tremendous pieces of music, as you said. Tremendous art direction, and yeah, I think this was my favorite one in the film. And apparently, it's been in development hell, as you mentioned, but they're thinking of making a film entirely based off this sequence.
Yeah, I think as far back as 2015 they were talking about that, so it's not really advanced since. But
so it'll get off the ground eventually.
What kind of film do you think they would make out of that?
I don't know. You'd have to have a cute animal sidekick.
Like angels versus demons type of thing, or
so the demon killed some kid's parents, and the parent has to scale the mountain to kill the Chernobog to visit the dead spirit of their father who died at the hands of the Chernobog.
Were you brought on to write this film, Gar?
That's basically the plot of every Disney film. Parent dies, kid goes on a journey.
Ah, yes. The old Disney classic.
Which we will get to in the next episode.
We sure will. In spades.
No, the parent doesn't die in the next episode. They're separate. Anyway.
Yeah.
We'll get to it.
Apparently the transition into the Ave Maria was to bring the audience down from the stark and frightening visuals that make up the first part of the piece. So it's kind of like, okay, that was scary and that was a bit much. It was very intense, and then it kind of brings it down. And I think it like if we say the film reached its crescendo with that, it kind of brought it down nicely to
a peaceful finish. Yeah. Where the spirits are walking, and we hear Ave Maria slowly come in as people are walking with their torches through the forest, which I think usually symbolizes like spirits traveling on a journey. And then we open into a nice nature scene, and then the film comes to a close, so that it doesn't end with a Devimon fighting Angemon on top of a mountain in the middle of a Digimon episode.
Maybe it was the 3 sequences that preceded it, but I felt a great sense of relief when that ended.
Yes, when the peaceful serenity opened in my heart as well when the film came to a close.
Thinking about the legacy of this film, Gar, as we said, Fantasia has grown in reputation over the years and is now widely acclaimed. Mm-hmm. The American Film Institute ranks it as 58 in their 100 Years, 100 Films list. In 1990, much like Pinocchio, it was chosen to be preserved by the Library of Congress as being of aesthetic and cultural importance.
Can they take the 3 bad sequences out of it?
Yeah, just do one of the shorter sequences.
5/8 of it are included in the Library of Congress.
The hippos have been left on the cutting room floor.
Get out of here, hippos. Sexy ostriches.
The Sorcerer's incarnation of Mickey, as we said, is probably one of the most famous ones still to this day, and this was the introduction of Mickey Mouse as we know him today. Mm-hmm. So there's 2 eras of Mickey Mouse that are very distinct, and they're not very long. So we have the classic Mickey Mouse, who has had a bit of resurgence because a lot of the Mickey Mouse shorts contain the classic version of Mickey.
There was even, for that anniversary or whatever, they did the little Steamboat Willie intro for their films, didn't they?
Yeah, and my watch contains classic Mickey as well, my Apple Watch.
There you go.
No ad, just I like Apple. I like Mickey Mouse.
We're willing to take an ad. From anybody.
Actually, when Steve Jobs sold Pixar to Disney, he became the largest single shareholder, so I think that's why Apple products contain Disney characters.
And that's why you love Apple as well as Disney with your... Oh, no, that's not a Mac, never mind.
Yeah, so Mickey Mouse, as we know him today, was launched by this film. Maybe there's an argument to say that he wasn't because not many people watched it, but...
Well, the depiction of Mickey Mouse in this film is very famous. Like, as you said, this is the launch of the new era of Mickey. The first reboot, if you will.
Yeah, and in fairness, he's largely looked the same since. If you look at Mickey Mouse Funhouse today, he's a bit more, obviously, since he's in 3D now.
Rounded.
A bit more rounded, a bit more...
expressive.
Softer, I suppose, was for want of a better term. But this was the first appearance of that Mickey that we know. I keep saying Mickey, it sounds dirty. The Sorcerer's Apprentice inspired a film, apparently, even though it's got very little to do with the actual short.
I haven't seen it. Though you said Nicolas Cage plays the sorcerer in it.
Yeah.
And if you watch this film, you can see it.
You stole my take.
Yeah, that was my take at the time.
No, it's a co-take.
You tried to reverse engineer my take into the script and claim it as your own. Like, look at his eyes. He has the Nicolas Cage eyes.
He's got those Nicolas Cage crazy eyes.
So yeah, look at the animation, and you can see why they chose Nicolas Cage. It's actually a good bit of casting.
Mickey Mouse in the live action film was played by Jay Baruchel, friend of Seth Rogen's, a Canadian actor who was in an awful lot of films in like the mid to late 2000s, despite the fact that he's very bland.
He played Hiccup in How to Play Trader Dragon, didn't he?
That's because we can't see him. His voice is fine. His acting, meh.
There you go.
Fantasound, the pioneering stereophonic sound system used in the film, was a first for its time.
Revolutionary. People could hear out of both ears.
But like, not only in terms of the audio experience, but it actually pioneered some techniques and processes that are considered standard today, like overdubbing, multi-track recording, and even noise reduction. All these things I think about when I edit the podcast every week.
There you go. Like the reducing all the noise that comes out of your mouth, am I right? Hey!
So...
Defeat.
You just bodied me this entire podcast. So I think overall, there's a lot to remember from Fantasia and there's a lot to like. But as I said, I would prefer to take it as a series and watch each one individually and take my favourites and leave the rest. The fact that they're all taken together in a long... Maybe I could have watched it in 2 sittings like they did in the theatre.
We should have taken an intermission.
We should have taken our 15-minute intermission, but we sat there for the whole 2 hours. And as much as I love animation, I love the short animation medium. Back-to-back shorts like that can be a bit grueling, especially if they're very different in tone.
You're not into the hippos except in a weird sexual one. On the bright side, Ken, the source material for this film is the classical music, which, by watching the film, I listened to.
Yes.
So I've done 100% of the work this week. Go me!
Well done, Gar. We'll see if you can keep up that trend next week.
So proud of myself. Is Dumbo based on something?
We don't want to spoil it, Gar. I have a feeling it's because I don't think it is.
We don't want to spoil it. That's not code for I don't know. We'll find out next week.
Gar, we're trying to hook people to come by next week to find out what Dumbo is based on or if it's based on anything.
Sure.
So, Fantasia. Good, not great.
Some of it's great. Some of it's bad. There you go. That's my take.
Enough said. That's nearly it for the show this week. Musical correspondent Nicole is back again with another song, but first, here's some stuff you need to know about our little podcast.
Mine's Garrett. That's one of the more important things. Gert will do. Grat, as my voice squeaks as I say Grat.
You can download new episodes of Magic by Design every Monday, where all magical podcasts are downloaded. Check our website at magicbydesign.buzzsprout.com. That's buzz like a bee and sprout like those vegetables nobody eats.
I will not accept Garth or Garrett with 1 T or 1 R. That is, frankly, an insult to my very nature as a human being.
Anyway, as Gar was saying, check out the website to see a full list of podcast providers. You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/magicbydesignpod, on Twitter at magicdesignpod, and on Insta at magicbydesignpod. We are posting some really cool content from Disney animation history and other fascinating content, so do be sure to check them out.
Don't call me Gary either. I don't want that.
Are you even listening to what I'm saying?
Yeah, Instagram, pictures.
If you like the show, please consider giving us a positive review on your podcast platform of choice. Share the podcast on your socials or simply tell a friend.
Yes, shout out the window to your neighbor and say magicbydesign.buzzsprout.com. You can even say the buzz by the like the bee and the sprout like the vegetable you hate thing as well. And they'll be like, haha, that's a good bit. I'll listen to the podcast. And you'll be friends. We make friends on this podcast. We are a tiny mom and pop, or should I say brother and brother podcast, and word of mouth really helps us to grow and reach more people. Brother. My brother. This isn't a Pokemon podcast, never mind. We would truly appreciate your help to spread Magic by Design to the masses. And to your point, they'll probably own Pokemon eventually as well. Yeah, and basically make us successful enough that Disney also buys us. That's really our aim here. Yeah, we really need that Disney money, yo. Even though they'll fire us the moment we fail. Yes. We will be back next week at the same time, same place, with Disney's 4th animated feature film, Dumbo. But until then, stay home, stay safe, and remember... if, like Mickey Mouse, you decide to mess with the dark arts and your brooms come to life, don't be surprised if they try to kill you. Now Nicole is back to play us out with a rendition of Ave Maria from Fantasia and some fun facts about the music of the film. Over to you, Nicole.
Hello there, Disney fanatics. This is Nicole, your musical correspondent, coming to you live once again from my bedroom. Let us enter the world of Fantasia. An elaborate Disney masterpiece set to classical pieces of music, all conducted by the wonderful Leopold Tchaikovsky. 7 of the 8 segments were performed by the Philadelphia Orchestra, while The Sorcerer's Apprentice was performed by 85 Hollywood musicians. Recording of the 7 pieces with the Philadelphia Orchestra began in April 1939 at the Academy of Music in Philadelphia. The recording setup was super elaborate for its time, with 33 mics placed around the orchestra, which were rigged into 8 optical sound recording machines in order to produce the heavily textured sound Walt desperately wanted to achieve. Walt didn't want the music to suffer, by being played from speakers behind a screen at movie theatres. So he wanted a really dynamic balance that allowed audiences to feel like they were on the podium with Tchaikovsky. So he worked with the RCA Corporation. They developed Fantasound, a stereophonic surround sound system that we use today, and frankly, as audiences, we completely take for granted. Tchaikovsky was hugely involved in the recording production side of the project, dictating to engineers how the dynamics should sound, and directed each speaker level and pan change during the Fantasia roadshow to ensure audiences had a live experience. This was all marked in his score, so literally he was cueing the engineers. So between the musicians and the new sound system, Wall spent a real pretty penny on the music side for Fantasia. Approximately about a fifth of the overall budget, which is huge. I think it amounts to 218,000 if I'm correct. The song we're focusing on this week is Ave Maria, that accompanies that beautiful last sequence. It is the only piece in the whole feature film that has lyrics. The choral performance you hear during the sequence is sung by the Westminster College Choir. It is a favourite of Irish weddings. This version of Ave Maria is composed by Franz Schubert. While I'm not a choir, I have sung a solo version of the song with some Fantasia backup. I hope you like it.